I brought my husband lunch at his office, but as I opened the door, I heard moaning. My daughter-in-law was on his lap, her blouse half open. I said nothing. The next morning, HR found the footage on every employee's screen. But that's getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how I got to that moment. Because the real story isn't about revenge. It's about finally learning to value myself after a lifetime of putting everyone else first. My name is Margaret, and at 58, I thought I'd figured out love. After losing my husband Tom 3 years ago to cancer, I'd accepted that chapter of my life was over. The house felt too quiet, the evenings too long, and my son David's weekly duty calls weren't enough to fill the emptiness that settled in my chest like a physical weight. That's why I started attending the grief support group at St. Mary's Community Center, not because I wanted to date again, but because I needed to remember how to exist without Tom's gentle presence anchoring my days. The group met every Thursday evening in a circle of mismatched folding chairs, where we shared our stories with people who understood that grief isn't something you get over, it's something you learn to carry. Robert joined the group 6 months after I did. He was different from the other widowers.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
Quieter, but not withdrawn. Thoughtful in a way that reminded me of Tom. When he spoke about losing his wife Patricia to a sudden heart attack, his voice carried the same raw bewilderment I recognized in my own reflections. We started having coffee after the meetings. Nothing romantic at first, just two people who understood that loneliness could be a constant companion even in a room full of people. 8 months ago, when Robert asked me to marry him, it felt like finding shelter after years in the rain. Not the passionate love I'd shared with Tom, but something gentler, more practical. A companionship between two people who'd learned that life was fragile and shouldn't be wasted on solitude. David seemed relieved when I told him about the engagement. I think he'd been worried about me living alone, though he'd never said so directly. The wedding was small, just immediate family and a few close friends. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, was polite but distant during the ceremony, the same way she'd been since marrying David 5 years ago. She never seemed particularly interested in building a relationship with me, always pleasant enough but keeping a careful distance. I'd attributed it to the natural awkwardness between mothers and daughters-in-law, never pushing for more intimacy than she seemed comfortable offering. Robert worked as a financial manager at Cascade Industries, a mid-sized company that handled logistics for several major retailers. It was steady work that he genuinely enjoyed, and I admired how he'd rebuilt his life after losing Patricia. He had a corner office on the 3rd floor with windows that looked out over the parking lot, and a small break area where he usually ate lunch alone while catching up on paperwork. That Tuesday started like any other. I'd spent the morning tending to my small garden, pulling weeds and deadheading the roses that Tom had planted during our 2nd year of marriage. The physical work felt good, grounding me in the present moment instead of drifting into memories. Around 11, I decided to surprise Robert with his favorite sandwich from the deli near our house. He'd been working longer hours lately, often staying past 6, and I thought he might appreciate not having to grab something from the vending machine. The drive to Cascade Industries took 20 minutes through familiar suburban streets, lined with strip malls and chain restaurants. I'd only been to Robert's office twice before, once when he'd forgotten his reading glasses and asked me to bring them, and another time for the company Christmas party, where I'd met some of his colleagues. The building was unremarkable, 3 stories of beige brick with tinted windows and a small lobby decorated with artificial plants. I signed in with the security guard, a kind older man named Frank, who remembered me from the Christmas party. He smiled and handed me a visitor's badge, telling me Robert was probably in his office since he'd seen him come back from a meeting about an hour earlier. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor, walking down the familiar hallway with its industrial carpet and fluorescent lighting. Recently, I'd learned that Sarah worked in the same building, in the marketing department on the 2nd floor. It was something that had come up casually during dinner at David's house the previous weekend. Sarah had mentioned being stressed about a project deadline, and when I asked where she worked, David had said, "Oh, didn't you know? She's at Cascade Industries too. Same place as Robert, Small world, right? The coincidence had surprised me, but in a city our size, it wasn't entirely unusual for people to end up working for the same company without realizing the connection initially. I reached Robert's office and raised my hand to knock, but stopped when I heard voices inside. The door was slightly ajar, which was unusual since Robert typically kept it closed during the day. I could hear him talking to someone, his voice lower than normal, almost intimate in a way that made me pause. That's when I heard the soft sound that changed everything. A quiet moan, unmistakably feminine, unmistakably sensual. My hand froze inches from the door as my brain struggled to process what I was hearing. Then I heard Robert's voice, rougher than I'd ever heard it. "We can't keep doing this here. Someone could walk in. No one ever comes to your office during lunch," came the response, and my blood turned to ice water as I recognized Sarah's voice. "Besides, David thinks I'm in a client meeting. We have time." I should have knocked. I should have cleared my throat loudly and given them a chance to compose themselves. Instead, some terrible curiosity made me push the door open just enough to see inside. The sight that greeted me will be burned into my memory forever. Sarah was sitting on Robert's lap, her back to the door, her dark hair falling over one shoulder. Her white blouse was unbuttoned and pushed off one shoulder, and Robert's hands were tangled in her hair. They were kissing with the desperate intensity of people who knew they were stealing something forbidden. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, watching my husband of 8 months kissing my son's wife of 5 years. The lunch bag slipped from my fingers, but the soft thud of it hitting the carpet was lost beneath the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. Neither of them noticed me. They were completely absorbed in each other, in this betrayal that was happening in broad daylight in Robert's office while my son worked unknowingly somewhere across town. I backed away slowly, pulling the door closed with trembling fingers, and walked back down the hallway on unsteady legs. The elevator ride down felt endless. Frank the security guard smiled and waved as I walked past his desk, but I couldn't manage to smile back. I made it to my car before the tears started, sitting in the parking lot of my husband's office building, staring at the lunch I'd never delivered, trying to understand how my quiet, predictable life had just exploded into 1,000 pieces. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The house felt different when I walked through the front door, like everything familiar had shifted slightly to the left. I sat in Tom's old recliner, the one I'd never had the heart to get rid of, and tried to process what I'd seen. How long had this been going on? How many times had Sarah looked me in the eye during family dinners while carrying on with my husband? How many conversations had I had with David about his work stress and Sarah's demanding schedule, never knowing that her absences were being spent in Robert's office? The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was the realization that I'd been living in a carefully constructed lie, surrounded by people who could look at me with apparent affection while systematically deceiving me. Sarah had sat at my kitchen table just last Sunday, complimenting my pot roast while planning her next encounter with my husband. When Robert came home that evening, he kissed my forehead the same way he always did and asked about my day. I watched his face carefully, looking for any sign of guilt or discomfort, but he seemed completely normal. Either he was an exceptional actor, or compartmentalizing his affair had become so natural that he felt no conflict at all. "How was work?" I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "The usual," he replied, loosening his tie. "Lots of meetings, paperwork. Sarah from marketing stopped by to discuss some budget projections for her department. Smart woman, very dedicated to her work. The casual way he mentioned her name, the ease with which he could lie to my face, made something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a mistake born of opportunity. This was calculated, ongoing, and they were both comfortable enough with the deception to discuss it as if it were just another business meeting. That night, I lay awake listening to Robert sleep beside me, wondering how many other details of my life were illusions. Had Sarah engineered getting a job at Robert's company? Had they planned this even before our wedding? Or had it started as innocent workplace conversation that slowly evolved into something more? I thought about David, probably lying in bed next to his wife, completely unaware that she was living a double life. I thought about the grandchildren I hoped to have someday, and how this betrayal would shatter their family before they ever had a chance to exist. I thought about Tom, and how he would have handled discovering something like this, and realized that I had no idea how to move forward from here. But as I lay there in the darkness, one thing became crystal clear. I wasn't going to pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen. The days of Margaret quietly accepting whatever life handed her were over. The question now was what I was going to do about it. Sarah and Robert had no idea that their carefully hidden affair had been discovered. They thought they were safe, smart, and in control of the situation. They had no way of knowing that the quiet, accommodating woman they'd been deceiving was about to become the architect of their downfall. Because some betrayals are so deep, so fundamentally wrong, that silence becomes complicity. And I was done being complicit in my own humiliation. The next few days passed in a haze of forced normalcy that felt like walking through quicksand. Every interaction with Robert became a performance where I had to pretend I didn't know what I knew. When he kissed me goodbye in the mornings, I fought the urge to pull away. When he asked about my day over dinner, I wondered if he was thinking about Sarah's hands in his hair. Wednesday evening, David called to invite us to dinner that weekend. His voice carried the cheerful exhaustion of someone juggling work and family responsibilities, completely unaware that his world was built on a foundation of lies. "Sarah's been working late all week on some big project," he said. "She really needs a break. I thought maybe we could all get together Sunday. Like old times." I gripped the phone tighter. What kind of project is keeping her so busy? Something with budget presentations, I think. She's been stressed about it. Actually, she mentioned that she's been working closely with people from other departments. Networking, you know? She says it's important for career advancement. The casual way he said it made my stomach turn. Sarah had been networking all right, just not in the way David imagined. I wondered how many of these late nights were actually spent in Robert's office, and how many lies she'd told my son to cover her tracks. "That sounds challenging," I managed to say. "I'm sure she's working very hard." "She is. Sometimes she doesn't get home until after 8. But you know Sarah, she's ambitious. She wants to make sure she's contributing to our future, especially with us thinking about starting a family soon." Starting a family. The words hit me like a physical blow. Here was my son, talking about building a life with a woman who was betraying him every chance she got. How could Sarah look at David and discuss having children while she was carrying on an affair with his stepfather? "That's wonderful, honey," I said, hating how hollow my voice sounded. "Robert and I would love to have dinner with you both." After hanging up, I found Robert in his study, reading reports with his reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked so normal, so trustworthy, like the man I'd married 8 months ago, not like someone capable of destroying my son's marriage. "David invited us for dinner Sunday," I said, watching his face carefully. "That's nice," Robert replied without looking up from his papers. "We haven't seen them in a couple weeks." The ease with which he could discuss spending time with David while sleeping with David's wife was breathtaking. There was no flicker of guilt, no moment of hesitation. He was either a sociopath or he'd become so comfortable with the deception that it no longer registered as wrong. Thursday night, I lay awake planning what I would say to Sarah when I confronted her. I imagined different scenarios, different approaches, the direct confrontation. "I know about you and Robert," the subtle approach, letting her know I suspected something and watching her reaction. The public exposure, revealing everything in front of David and watching her world crumble. But Friday morning brought a phone call that changed everything. "Margaret, honey, this is Linda from the grief support group," came the familiar voice of one of the women from St. Mary's. "I hope you don't mind me calling, but I wanted to check on you. You and Robert both missed last week's meeting, and frankly, some of us are worried." I'd completely forgotten about the support group. With everything that had happened, our regular Thursday meetings had been the furthest thing from my mind. "We're fine, Linda. Just busy with family things." "Well, that's good to hear. You know, it's funny, but Alice mentioned seeing Robert at that new cafe downtown on Thursday evening. She said he was with a younger woman, very pretty, dark hair. Alice thought maybe he had a daughter or niece visiting. But since we all know about his family situation, my heart started pounding. Thursday evening. The same night we were supposed to be at group therapy, Robert had been at a cafe with Sarah. Did Alice say anything else about what she saw? "Oh, you know Alice. She notices everything." She said they seemed very intimate. holding hands across the table, that sort of thing. But I'm sure it was perfectly innocent. Maybe a work colleague or something. Work colleague. The irony was almost laughable. I'm sure you're right, Linda. Thanks for checking on us. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen staring at my coffee cup, processing this new information. Robert had lied about where he was Thursday night. He'd told me he was staying late at the office to finish quarterly reports, when actually he'd been on what amounted to a date with my daughter-in-law. The pattern was becoming clearer now. Sarah's late nights weren't just about work meetings in Robert's office. They were going out together, acting like a real couple while their respective spouses sat at home, unknowing and trusting. I thought about Alice from the grief group, a sharp-eyed woman in her 70s who noticed everything and forgot nothing. If she'd seen them together, looking intimate and comfortable, it meant this affair had moved beyond stolen moments at work. They were taking risks, getting careless, acting like people who believed they were in love. That afternoon, I made a decision that surprised even me. I drove to David's office. My son worked as a project manager for a construction company, spending his days coordinating subcontractors and managing timelines. His office was in a converted warehouse on the outskirts of town, all exposed brick and industrial lighting that somehow managed to feel warm and inviting. "Mom!" David looked up from his computer with genuine pleasure when I walked in. "This is a nice surprise. What brings you by?" Looking at his face, so open and trusting, I felt my resolve waver. How could I destroy his happiness? How could I be the one to tell him that his wife was cheating? That his marriage was a lie? "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd see how you were doing," I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "You sounded tired on the phone last night." "I am tired," he admitted, rubbing his eyes. "This project we're working on has been brutal. 12-hour days for the past 3 weeks. I feel like I barely see Sarah anymore." "How is she handling your busy schedule?" "Better than I expected. Actually, she's been really understanding about the long hours. She's got her own work stress, so she gets it. Sometimes I think we're like ships passing in the night. But that's just how it is when you're both building careers, you know? Ships passing in the night. If only he knew how accurate that metaphor was, and how deliberately Sarah was creating that distance. "Do you ever worry about growing apart?" I asked carefully. David leaned back in his chair, considering the question seriously. "Sometimes. But Sarah and we have a solid foundation. We talk about everything. We trust each other completely. That's what matters. Right? Trust?" The word hung in the air between us like an accusation. Trust. The thing his wife was systematically destroying every time she walked into Robert's office. "Yes," I said quietly. "Trust matters more than anything." "Besides," David continued, "Sarah's been making real progress at work. She says she's developing important professional relationships that could lead to bigger opportunities. I'm proud of her for being so proactive about her career." Professional relationships. The euphemisms Sarah used to describe her affair were almost impressive in their creativity. "That's wonderful," I managed. "It's important to have mentors in the workplace." "Exactly." She mentioned working closely with some of the senior management, learning from their experience. "I think it's great that she's finding people who believe in her potential." I bit my tongue to keep from saying what I was really thinking, that Robert was believing in more than just Sarah's professional potential. Driving home from David's office, I felt the weight of the secret pressing down on me like a physical force. My son was living in a fantasy world where his wife was a dedicated professional and loving partner, when the reality was that she was methodically deceiving him while planning a future that didn't include him. But what haunted me most was how normal everything seemed on the surface. David went to work every day, came home to a wife who kissed him hello and asked about his day. Sarah maintained her role as the supportive spouse, probably even genuinely caring about David in her own compartmentalized way. Robert continued being the attentive husband, bringing me flowers on Fridays, and remembering to ask about my doctor's appointments. It was like living inside a perfectly constructed dollhouse where all the furniture looked real, until you realized it was just painted cardboard. That evening, Robert came home with Chinese takeout, and a story about his day that I now knew was carefully edited to remove any mention of Sarah. "How was your day?" he asked, serving lo mein onto our plates. "I visited David at his office," I said, watching for any reaction. "That's nice. How's he doing?" "Tired. Working long hours. He says he barely sees Sarah anymore because they're both so busy with work." Robert nodded sympathetically. "It's hard when both partners are focused on their careers. The important thing is supporting each other's goals." The casual way he could discuss David's marriage while actively sabotaging it was staggering. I wanted to scream, to throw the takeout containers against the wall, to demand he explain how he could sit there eating dinner with me while planning his next encounter with my son's wife. Instead, I smiled and asked him to pass the sweet and sour sauce. Because I was beginning to realize that my silence wasn't just about protecting David from the truth. It was about giving Sarah and Robert enough rope to hang themselves. The more comfortable they became, the more risks they would take. And when people get careless, they make mistakes. I just had to be patient enough to catch them making a big one. Sunday dinner at David's house felt like walking into a carefully choreographed performance where I was the only one who knew the script was a lie. Sarah greeted Robert and me at the door wearing a soft blue sweater that brought out her eyes, looking every inch the devoted wife and daughter-in-law. "Margaret, you look lovely," she said, giving me a hug that lasted exactly the right amount of time to seem genuine without being overly familiar. "And Robert, how was your week?" I watched my husband's face as Sarah spoke to him. There was nothing obvious, no lingering glances or secret smiles, but I caught something in the way his voice softened when he answered her. "Busy as always," he said. "How's that big project you've been working on?" "Finally finished," Sarah replied with a relieved smile. "All those late nights paid off. I think management was impressed with the presentation." David appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel, his face lighting up when he saw us. "Mom, Robert, perfect timing. I just pulled the roast out of the oven." He kissed Sarah's temple as he passed her, a gesture so natural and affectionate that it made my chest ache. My son was completely, blissfully unaware that his wife had spent those late nights in another man's arms. Over dinner, I found myself studying Sarah with new eyes. She was an accomplished liar. I had to give her that. She asked Robert thoughtful questions about his work that sounded like polite dinner conversation, but carried undertones only I could detect. When she mentioned working with various departments at Cascade Industries, she managed to make it sound professional while her eyes lingered on Robert just a fraction too long. "Sarah's always been good at networking," David said proudly. "She has this way of connecting with people, making them want to help her succeed." "Some people are just naturally charming," Robert replied, and I caught the slight emphasis on the word naturally. "It's all about finding mentors who can guide your career development," Sarah added. "I've been lucky to work with some very experienced professionals who've taken an interest in my growth." The double meanings in their conversation were making me sick to my stomach, but I forced myself to keep eating, to smile and nod at appropriate moments. When David got up to get more wine from the kitchen, Sarah's hand briefly brushed Robert's as she reached for the salt, and I saw her lips curve in the faintest smile. That's when I knew I couldn't just sit back and wait for them to get careless. I needed to understand the full scope of their betrayal, to know exactly what I was dealing with before I decided how to handle it. The next morning after Robert left for work, I did something I'd never done in my life. I followed someone. I parked across the street from Cascade Industries and waited. At 11:30, I saw Sarah's red Honda Civic pull into the parking lot. She walked into the building with purpose, her stride confident and familiar. This wasn't someone visiting occasionally for work meetings. This was someone who knew exactly where she was going. At 12:15, I watched Sarah and Robert exit the building together. They didn't touch, didn't walk too close together, but there was an intimacy in their body language that was unmistakable to someone looking for it. They got into Robert's car and drove to a small Italian restaurant about 10 minutes away. I followed at a distance, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. What was I doing? Had I really become the kind of woman who spied on her husband? But I needed to see this for myself, to confirm what I already knew in my heart. The restaurant was tucked into a strip mall, the kind of place you'd choose if you wanted to have a private conversation without running into anyone you knew. I parked where I could see through the window and watched them settle into a corner booth. From my vantage point, I could see Robert lean across the table, his hand covering Sarah's. She was smiling. That radiant expression women get when they're with someone who makes them feel special. It was the same look I'd seen on her face during her wedding to David, but she'd never looked at my son quite like this. They talked intently for over an hour, their heads close together, occasionally laughing at private jokes. When Robert got up to use the restroom, Sarah pulled out her phone and took a selfie, probably to send to him later. The casual intimacy of it all was devastating. Watching them together, I realized this wasn't just a physical affair. They were acting like a couple in love, like people who'd found something special together and were nurturing it carefully, which somehow made it worse than if it had been just about sex. When they finally left the restaurant, they stood by Robert's car for a few more minutes, talking quietly. Sarah reached up and straightened Robert's tie, a widely gesture that felt like a knife in my chest. Then she got in her own car and drove back to work, while Robert sat in his car for another 5 minutes, probably composing himself before returning to his office and his normal life. I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling with what I'd witnessed. This wasn't a casual workplace flirtation that had gotten out of hand. This was a full relationship, complete with romantic lunches and intimate conversations. They were building something together while systematically deceiving David and me. That evening, I couldn't concentrate on anything. I tried reading, watching television, organizing my already organized kitchen cabinets, but nothing could distract me from the images running through my head. When Robert came home, I scrutinized his face for any sign of guilt or satisfaction, but he seemed completely normal. "How was your day?" he asked. The same question he asked every evening. "Fine," I replied, wondering if he could hear the lie in my voice the way I could hear his. The next day, I decided to visit Sarah's workplace more deliberately. I called the main number for Cascade Industries and asked to speak with someone in marketing about a potential advertising opportunity for a fictional small business. The receptionist connected me to Sarah's extension. "Sarah Morrison Marketing Department," came her voice, professional and crisp. "Hi, this is Margaret Williams," I said, using my maiden name. "I'm interested in discussing some marketing services for my consulting business, of course. I'd be happy to help. Would you like to schedule a meeting to discuss your needs? Actually, I was hoping to get a sense of your availability this week. I know how busy you marketing professionals can be. This week is pretty manageable, actually. I have some flexibility in my schedule. Most of my intensive projects wrapped up recently." Interesting. According to David, Sarah had been working late every night, stressed about deadlines and major presentations. But according to Sarah herself, her schedule was pretty manageable, with flexibility. That's wonderful. And you work standard business hours, I assume? 9 to 5? Generally, yes, though sometimes I stay late when projects require it. But lately, I've been able to maintain better work-life balance. While David thought she was overwhelmed with work, Sarah was apparently enjoying a more relaxed schedule that gave her plenty of time for long lunches with my husband. I made an excuse to end the call without scheduling a meeting, but I'd learned what I needed to know. Sarah was lying to David about her work demands, creating fictional stress and deadlines to explain her absences and distraction. That afternoon, I drove past the restaurant where I'd seen them the day before. I don't know what I was hoping to accomplish, but I felt compelled to return to the scene of their betrayal, as if I could understand it better by being there. The manager, a friendly Italian man in his 60s, was wiping down tables when I walked in. "Are you dining alone today?" he asked. "Actually, I'm meeting someone," I said, then took a chance. "I think my friends were here yesterday around lunchtime. A man with gray hair and a younger woman with dark hair. They seemed to really enjoy themselves." His face lit up with recognition. "Ah, yes. Lovely couple. They come in every week, sometimes twice. Very much in love, those two. The way they look at each other, it reminds me of when I first met my wife. Every week. Sometimes twice. They do seem very happy together," I managed. "Oh, yes. And so polite. Always tip well, never cause any trouble. You can tell they cherish their time together. In today's world, it's beautiful to see such devotion." I ordered a coffee I didn't want and sat in the same booth where they'd been yesterday, trying to imagine what they talked about during these regular meetings. Did they discuss their plans for the future? Did Robert tell Sarah about his life with me, the way married men often complain about their wives to their mistresses? Did Sarah share details about her marriage to David, painting him as inadequate or boring compared to the exciting older man who made her feel special? The coffee tasted like ash in my mouth as I realized the full scope of what they'd built together. This wasn't an affair that was going to burn out naturally. They'd established routines, favorite places, inside jokes. They were creating a relationship that existed parallel to their real lives, and they were both invested in maintaining it. When I got home, there was a message from David on my answering machine. "Hi, Mom. Just wanted to let you know that Sarah and I are thinking about taking a long weekend trip next month. She's been working so hard lately. I want to surprise her with something special. Maybe that bed and breakfast in the mountains she's always wanted to visit. I'm hoping some time away will help us reconnect, you know? Anyway, love you. Talk soon." I played the message 3 times, each repetition feeling like another small death. My son was planning a romantic getaway to reconnect with his wife, who was spending her lunch hours reconnecting with his stepfather. That night, lying in bed next to Robert, listening to his steady breathing, I made a decision. I couldn't continue this passive observation much longer. Every day I waited was another day David lived in ignorance. Another day Sarah and Robert grew more confident in their deception. But I also couldn't just confront them without a plan. If I was going to destroy their carefully constructed lies, I needed to do it in a way that would expose the full truth and protect David from any manipulation they might attempt afterward. I needed evidence that couldn't be denied, explained away, or spun into something innocent, and I was going to get it, no matter what it cost me. The opportunity to gather real evidence came sooner than I expected, in the form of Robert's habit of leaving his phone charging on the kitchen counter while he showered each morning. I'd never been the type of wife to check her husband's phone. With Tom, the thought had never occurred to me, and with Robert, I'd trusted him completely until now. But Tuesday morning, as I heard the shower running upstairs, I found myself staring at his phone like it held all the answers I desperately needed. My hands shook as I picked it up. The lock screen showed several text message notifications, and one name made my blood run cold. S. Morrison. Sarah had Robert saved in her phone under her married name, probably so David wouldn't be suspicious if he ever saw it. I knew Robert's passcode because I'd watched him enter it dozens of times. Our wedding date. The irony of using that number to unlock evidence of his betrayal wasn't lost on me. The text thread between them was devastating in its casual intimacy. "Missing you already. Yesterday was perfect. Can't stop thinking about your hands in my hair. David's working late again Thursday. My place? I wish we didn't have to hide like this. Soon, my love. Soon we won't have to. Soon we won't have to." The phrase echoed in my mind as I scrolled through weeks of messages. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning a future together. A future that apparently didn't include David or me. I found older messages that made my stomach turn. David suspects nothing. He actually thanked me for working so hard on my career development. Margaret is so trusting. Sometimes I feel guilty, but then I remember how right this feels. We deserve happiness, Robert. We've both suffered enough loss. They were using their grief, their status as people who'd experienced tragedy, to justify destroying 2 marriages. Sarah was actively manipulating David's trust while Robert used my own compassion against me. But the message that nearly made me drop the phone was from just 3 days ago. "I think it's time we tell them. David's talking about that weekend trip and I can't keep pretending. I want to be with you openly. Are you sure you're ready? It won't be easy. I'm tired of living a lie." We can help them understand that sometimes people grow apart. It's better to be honest than to stay in marriages that aren't working. Marriages that aren't working. Sarah was rewriting the narrative, painting her marriage to David as something that was naturally failing rather than something she was actively destroying. And Robert was apparently ready to end our 8-month marriage for a woman young enough to be his daughter. I quickly took photos of the most damning messages with my own phone, my heart pounding as I heard the shower shut off upstairs. I put Robert's phone back exactly where I'd found it and busied myself making coffee, trying to look normal when he came downstairs a few minutes later. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, kissing my cheek with lips that had whispered endearments to another woman. Sleep well? Fine, I managed, wondering how he could stand there acting loving when he was planning to leave me for my son's wife. That afternoon, while Robert was at work, I called David. Mom, what's up? His voice carried the busy distraction of someone juggling multiple responsibilities. I was just thinking about that trip you mentioned. Have you made any plans yet? Actually, yes. I booked that bed and breakfast in Asheville for next weekend. Sarah doesn't know yet. I want it to be a surprise. I'm hoping it'll be good for us to get away from work stress and just focus on each other. Work stress that didn't exist. A marriage that Sarah was actively sabotaging while he planned romantic gestures to save it. That sounds wonderful, honey. I'm sure she'll love it. I hope so. Honestly, Mom, I've been feeling like we're drifting apart lately. Not in a bad way, just distant. Like we're both so focused on our careers that we forget to be a couple sometimes. The pain in his voice was unbearable. He could sense something was wrong but had no idea what. He was blaming work stress and natural relationship evolution for what was actually calculated betrayal. Relationships take work, I said, hating myself for the platitude. Communication is key. You're right. That's why this trip is so important. I want to really talk to her, find out what she needs from me to feel more connected. I love her so much. Mom, I want to spend the rest of my life making her happy. I closed my eyes, fighting tears. My son was planning to pour his heart out to a woman who was planning to leave him for his stepfather. That evening, Robert came home with flowers, white roses, my favorites. The gesture that once would have touched me now felt like a mockery. What's the occasion? I asked, forcing a smile. Do I need an occasion to bring my wife flowers? He replied. But there was something in his expression that looked almost like guilt. Or perhaps preparation for guilt. Over dinner, he seemed more attentive than usual, asking about my day, complimenting the meal I'd prepared, even suggesting we plan a vacation together. I realized he was either having second thoughts about leaving me, or he was trying to assuage his conscience before he did. Where would you like to go? I asked, playing along. Maybe somewhere warm, Florida, or one of those Caribbean cruises you mentioned wanting to try. A Caribbean cruise, something that would take weeks to plan, book, and anticipate. He was either genuinely reconsidering his relationship with Sarah, or he was building an elaborate lie to make his eventual departure seem more sudden and shocking. That sounds lovely, I said. We should look into it. I'll pick up some brochures tomorrow, he promised. After dinner, while Robert watched television, I retreated to the guest bedroom that I'd been using as an office and tried to think clearly about my options. I could confront them directly, but they would likely deny everything and become more careful about hiding their affair. I could tell David what I'd discovered, but without concrete proof, Sarah might convince him that I was jealous or delusional. I could try to break them up by making it difficult for them to meet, but that would only delay the inevitable. Or I could let them execute their plan and make sure David learned the truth in a way that would leave no room for manipulation or doubt. Wednesday evening, my decision crystallized when David called with news that made everything worse. Mom, I need to ask you something, he said, his voice carrying an excitement I hadn't heard in months. Would you and Robert be willing to co-sign on a loan for me? A loan? What for? I want to put a down payment on a house. A bigger place with a yard. Sarah and I have been talking about starting a family, and I want to surprise her by making an offer on this perfect house I found. A house. He was taking on debt, making major life decisions, planning a future based on a marriage that was about to implode. David, that's a big step. Are you sure this is the right time? I've never been more sure of anything. Sarah mentioned that she's ready to take our relationship to the next level, and I want to show her how committed I am. A house feels like the right way to do that. Sarah had mentioned being ready to take their relationship to the next level, all right, just not with David. How much are we talking about? I asked, stalling for time. $20,000 for the down payment. I know it's a lot to ask, but with both your signatures, I can get better loan terms. And I'll pay you back every penny. I promise. $20,000 to buy a house for a marriage that wouldn't exist in a few weeks. My son was about to go into debt for a future that his wife was planning to destroy. Let me talk to Robert about it, I said, knowing I would do no such thing. After hanging up, I sat in the darkness of my office, feeling the weight of all the secrets I was carrying. David was planning surprises and making major life decisions based on lies. Sarah and Robert were planning their grand revelation, probably timing it for maximum drama. And I was caught in the middle, knowing that everything my son believed about his life was about to crumble. That's when I realized I couldn't just gather evidence and wait for them to confess. I needed to take control of the situation before David made any more irreversible decisions based on Sarah's deception. I pulled out my laptop and did something I'd never imagined I would do. I researched private investigators. If Sarah and Robert wanted to play games with people's lives, if they thought they could manipulate everyone around them with carefully crafted lies and stolen moments, they were about to learn that some people don't stay fooled forever. Some people fight back. And I was done being the trusting wife who made it easy for everyone else to lie to her. Robert and Sarah had underestimated me, dismissed me as someone too nice, too naive, too grateful for their attention to ever cause them problems. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. Thursday morning, I met with James McKinley from McKinley Investigations at a small coffee shop 20 minutes from my house. He was nothing like the gruff, chain-smoking detective I'd imagined. In his mid-40s, with kind eyes and a gentle manner, he looked more like a school principal than a private investigator. I have to tell you, Mrs. Peterson, he said after I'd explained my situation, cases involving family members are always the most difficult. Are you absolutely certain you want to know what we might find? I thought about David's excited voice when he'd talked about buying a house, about the loan he wanted Robert and me to co-sign, about the future he was planning with a woman who was counting down the days until she could leave him. I'm certain, I said, but I need more than just proof of the affair. I need to understand their timeline, their plans. My son is about to make major financial decisions based on lies, and I can't let that happen. James nodded thoughtfully. Electronic surveillance of a workplace can be tricky from a legal standpoint, but documenting their meetings in public places is straightforward. How quickly do you need this information? Soon? I think they're planning to reveal everything within the next few weeks. I can start today. I'll need photos of both subjects and their work schedules. I pulled out my phone and showed him pictures of Robert and Sarah from David's wedding 5 years ago. Looking at the photo now, seeing Sarah's radiant smile as she danced with my son on their wedding day made my stomach clench. Had she always been capable of this level of deception, or had she learned it along the way? I'll have preliminary findings for you by Monday, James promised. And Mrs. Peterson? Whatever you decide to do with this information, make sure you're prepared for the consequences. Once these kinds of secrets come out, there's no putting them back. That afternoon, I did something that felt like an act of rebellion. I went shopping, not for groceries or household necessities, but for myself. I bought a new dress, had my hair styled, even treated myself to a manicure. If my marriage was ending, if my family was about to be torn apart, I wanted to face it looking like a woman who valued herself. The woman who looked back at me from the salon mirror was different from the one who'd walked in, stronger somehow, with a spark in her eyes that had been missing for months. Robert barely glanced up from his newspaper when I came home, but I caught him doing a double take a few minutes later. You look nice, he said, but there was a question in his voice. Thank you. I felt like treating myself. Special occasion? I met his eyes steadily. Just felt like it was time for a change. Friday evening brought the call I'd been dreading. David phoned to tell me he'd put an offer on the house, contingent on getting the loan approval with our co-signature. The realtor says it's exactly what Sarah's been dreaming of, he said, his voice bubbling with excitement. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a big kitchen with an island. There's even a nursery that would be perfect for when we start our family. A nursery? My son was planning for grandchildren I would probably never get to know, at least not in the way I'd imagined. David, about that loan, I started, then stopped. How could I explain my hesitation without revealing what I knew? I know it's a lot to ask, Mom, but I promise I'll pay you back. This house represents everything Sarah and I have been working toward, our future together. Saturday morning, I received the first report from James. He'd followed Robert and Sarah to their usual restaurant on Friday, then to a small park where they'd walked hand in hand like any other couple. The photos were damning. Robert helping Sarah into his car, their intimate conversation over lunch, Sarah reaching up to kiss him goodbye by their cars. But the most revealing information was in James's notes. Subjects appear comfortable with public displays of affection, suggesting either extreme carelessness or confidence that discovery is unlikely. Observed female subject taking photographs with male subject, possibly for social media or personal collection. Relationship appears well established and serious. Taking photographs. Sarah was documenting their relationship, probably planning to make it public soon. The evidence was mounting that they intended to come clean very soon. Sunday brought another family dinner, this one at our house. I cooked Robert's favorite meal and set the table with our wedding china, watching my husband and daughter-in-law interact with new eyes. They were more careful in front of David and me, but I caught small signs. The way Sarah's eyes lingered on Robert when she thought no one was looking. How Robert found excuses to move around the kitchen near where she was standing. The slight tension when David casually mentioned that Sarah had been working late again. "Actually," Sarah said, "I think my schedule's going to be more normal from here on out. I've wrapped up most of the intensive projects." "That's great," David replied, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "I was starting to worry that you were burning yourself out." "No need to worry," she said, but her eyes were on Robert. "I've learned to prioritize what's really important." After dinner, while David helped me clear the table, I watched through the kitchen window as Robert and Sarah stood on the back patio. They weren't touching, but their body language spoke volumes. Robert was gesturing animatedly, Sarah nodding seriously. They looked like two people making important plans. "Mom, are you okay?" David's voice startled me back to the present. "Of course, honey. Why? You seem distracted lately. Distant. Is everything all right with you and Robert?" The concern in his voice nearly broke my heart. Here he was, worried about my marriage while his own was disintegrating around him. "We're fine," I lied. "Just adjusting to married life, you know. It takes time to blend two lives together." "I'm glad you found Robert," David said softly. "After Dad died, I worried about you being alone. Robert's a good man. He makes you happy. If only he knew that the man he was praising was planning to destroy our family." Monday brought James's second report, and this one changed everything. He'd followed them to a real estate office. Female subject met with realtor at Sunnyside Properties at 2:30 p.m., his notes read. Male subject joined them at 3:00 p.m. Meeting lasted approximately 1 hour. Subjects appeared to be discussing property listings, possibly planning cohabitation or joint purchase. They were looking at places to live together. While David was trying to buy a house for his marriage, Sarah was shopping for a home with his stepfather. I called James immediately. "Are you certain about what you saw?" "Absolutely. I managed to speak with the receptionist afterward. She confirmed they were looking at rental properties, 2-bedroom units available for immediate occupancy." The female gave her name as Sarah Collins. Sarah Collins. She was already using a different last name, practicing for her new life. That evening, I made a decision that surprised even me. While Robert was in the shower, I used his phone to send a text message to Sarah. "Can't wait for tomorrow. This will change everything." Then I deleted the message from his sent folder. I needed to accelerate their timeline, to force them into action before David signed any loan documents or made any more irreversible commitments. If they were planning to reveal their relationship soon anyway, I was going to make sure it happened on my terms. Tuesday morning, I called David and told him I needed more time to think about the loan. "Is there a problem, Mom? The realtor says we need to move quickly if we want the house." "No problem, honey. I just want to make sure we understand all the implications. Give me until Friday to discuss it with Robert." "Okay. But I really hope you'll say yes. This house means everything to Sarah and me." Friday. That gave me 3 days to put my plan into motion. I called James and asked him to be ready with a complete photographic record by Thursday evening. Then I did something that felt both terrifying and liberating. I made copies of all the text message screenshots I'd taken from Robert's phone. Sarah and Robert thought they were in control of their narrative. that they could choose the time and place to reveal their relationship. They thought they could manipulate David and me, paint their affair as some kind of tragic love story, where they'd found happiness after loss. They were wrong. By Thursday evening, I would have everything I needed to show David exactly who his wife really was. By Friday morning, when he was expecting an answer about the loan, he would know that his marriage was built on lies, and his wife was planning to leave him for his stepfather. It wasn't going to be the gentle revelation they'd planned, the careful conversation where they explained how they'd fallen in love and hoped everyone could understand. It was going to be the truth, sudden and undeniable, delivered by someone who'd been underestimated for far too long. Robert and Sarah had forgotten one crucial thing. When you systematically deceive someone, you give them all the motivation they need to ensure your secrets see the light of day. Thursday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if the universe was conspiring to make this day memorable. I woke before dawn, not from anxiety, but from a strange sense of anticipation. Today, the lies would end. By 7 a.m., I'd already called James to confirm he had all the documentation ready. 3 days of surveillance had yielded an impressive collection, photographs of Robert and Sarah at restaurants, the real estate office, even holding hands while walking through a park on Wednesday evening. The timestamps and locations would make denial impossible. "Are you sure you want to do this, Mrs. Peterson?" James asked one final time. "Once you show these to your son, there's no taking it back." I've never been more certain of anything in my life. At 8:30, I called David at his office. "Mom, this is early for you. Everything okay? I need to see you today. It's important. Can you meet me for lunch?" "Sure, but you sound serious. Is it about the loan?" "Among other things. Meet me at Romano's at noon." "And David? Come alone." Romano's was a quiet Italian restaurant downtown, the kind of place where you could have a private conversation without being overheard. I arrived early and chose a corner booth where we wouldn't be disturbed. The manila envelope containing James's photographs sat on the table in front of me like an unexploded bomb. David arrived exactly at noon, his face creased with concern. "Mom, you're scaring me. What's going on?" I looked at my son, this good man who'd inherited his father's trusting nature and gentle heart. In about 5 minutes, his world was going to shatter, and I was the one holding the hammer. "David, I need you to listen to me very carefully. What I'm about to show you is going to hurt, but you need to see it before you make any more decisions about your future." His face went pale. "Is someone sick? Are you dying?" "No, honey. No one's dying." I slid the envelope across the table. "But someone you love has been lying to you." David's hands shook as he opened the envelope and saw the first photograph, Sarah and Robert kissing in the parking lot of Cascade Industries. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, recognition, and finally, devastating understanding. "This is..." He flipped to the next photo, then the next. Sarah feeding Robert a bite of dessert at their regular restaurant. Robert's hand on Sarah's back as they walked into the real estate office. "How long have you known?" "I discovered them by accident 2 weeks ago. I hired an investigator to document everything." David stared at a photo of Sarah laughing at something Robert had said, her hand resting on his arm with casual intimacy. "How long has this been going on?" "Based on what I found, at least 3 months, probably longer." He was quiet for a long time, studying each photograph like he was trying to find evidence that this was all an elaborate mistake. Finally, he looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "The loan! You were trying to protect me from buying a house with someone who's planning to leave me. She's already been looking at apartments with Robert. She's using the name Sarah Collins now." David's laugh was hollow and broken. "Sarah Collins. She always hated the name Morrison, said it sounded too ordinary." He wiped his eyes with his napkin. "God, Mom, I feel so stupid. All those late nights, all that talk about career development and networking." "She was networking, all right." "You're not stupid, David. You trusted your wife. That's what married people do." "I was going to surprise her with the house this weekend. I had it all planned out. Champagne, the deed with both our names on it." A speech about our future together. He laughed bitterly. I guess she's already planned our future, just not with me in it. I reached across the table and took his hand. I'm so sorry, honey. I know how much you love her. Do I? How can you love someone you don't really know? He gathered the photos into a neat stack. What am I supposed to do now? Confront her? Pretend I don't know? Wait for her to leave me? That's up to you. But David, you deserve better than living a lie. We sat in silence for several minutes, both lost in our own thoughts. Finally, David squared his shoulders, and I saw a flash of the determined little boy who used to face playground bullies twice his size. I'm going to end this today. Both of them need to face what they've done. Are you sure you're ready for that? I'm ready to stop being a fool. That afternoon, while David went home to wait for Sarah, I prepared for my own confrontation. I arranged the remaining photos on our dining room table, the table where Robert and I had shared quiet dinners, where we'd talked about our future together, where he'd proposed 8 months ago. Robert came home at his usual time, calling out a cheerful greeting as he hung up his coat. When he walked into the dining room and saw the photographs spread across the table, he stopped dead in his tracks. Margaret. His voice was barely a whisper. Hello, Robert. How was your day? Any interesting meetings with the marketing department? His face cycled through the same emotions David's had. Shock, denial, resignation. How long have you known? Long enough. Long enough to watch you lie to my face every single day. Long enough to see you plan a future with my son's wife while bringing me flowers and talking about Caribbean cruises. He sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 62 years. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. How was it supposed to happen? Were you planning to wait until after David bought that house? After he went into debt for a marriage you were planning to destroy? We were going to tell you both soon. We didn't want to hurt anyone unnecessarily. I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Unnecessarily? Robert, you've been having an affair with my daughter-in-law for months. You've been lying to me and to my son every single day. What part of that was necessary? You don't understand. Sarah and I, we found something special together, something real. What you found was each other's selfishness. What you built was a relationship based on lies and betrayal. Robert's phone buzzed with a text message. Without thinking, he glanced at it, and I saw his face go white. What is it? David. He knows. He's confronted Sarah. The call came 20 minutes later. David's voice was steady but hollow. It's over. Mom? She's gone. Packed a bag and left while I was talking. Didn't even try to deny it. Just said she was sorry I had to find out this way. Where did she go? I assumed to Robert. She said they'd been planning to move in together anyway, that this just speeds up their timeline. I looked at Robert, who was staring at his phone with an expression of growing panic. David's thrown her out, I told him. She's probably on her way here. Margaret, please, let me explain. There's nothing to explain. You made your choice. Both of you did. When Sarah arrived 30 minutes later, she found Robert and me sitting in our living room like adversaries preparing for battle. Her usual composure was gone, replaced by the frantic energy of someone whose carefully laid plans had exploded in her face. This isn't how we wanted this to happen, she said, looking between Robert and me. No, I agreed. You wanted to control the narrative. Paint yourselves as tragic lovers who found happiness after loss. Make David and me feel sorry for you. We do love each other, Robert said, reaching for Sarah's hand. You love the fantasy you've created. You love the excitement of sneaking around, the thrill of getting away with something. But love, real love, doesn't destroy innocent people for its own gratification. Sarah's mask finally slipped completely. David will be fine. He's young. He'll find someone else. And you, she looked at me with barely concealed contempt. You'll be fine too. You were alone before Robert. You can be alone again. The casual cruelty of her words was staggering. This was who she really was, beneath the pleasant facade she'd worn for 5 years. You're right, I said calmly. I was alone before Robert, and I was handling it just fine. I don't need a man who's capable of this level of deception. I stood up and walked to the front door, opening it wide. Get out. Both of you. You deserve each other." After they left, I sat in my quiet house and felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. The tension that had been building for 2 weeks, the weight of carrying everyone's secrets, the exhaustion of pretending everything was normal, it was all gone. My phone rang. David's name on the screen. "How are you doing?" he asked. "Better than I expected." "How about you?" "Devastated. Relieved, angry, grateful." He paused. "Mom, thank you for protecting me from making that loan, for finding out the truth, for having the courage to show me what I needed to see. You would have done the same for me." "I hope so. I hope I would have been that brave." 6 months later, I was sitting in my garden on a warm Saturday morning when David arrived with coffee and pastries from the bakery downtown. Our weekly ritual had become one of my favorite parts of the week. "Any word from the dynamic duo?" he asked, settling into the chair beside me. "Sarah's mother called last week. Apparently they lasted 3 months before Robert decided he wasn't ready for such a serious relationship after all." David shook his head. "I almost feel sorry for her. Almost. She's young. She'll figure herself out eventually." "What about you? Any regrets about the divorce?" I considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, I'd been a woman who defined herself through her relationships, first as Tom's wife, then as Robert's. Now I was simply Margaret, and I was discovering that I liked her very much. None at all. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. David smiled. "Good, because I have news. I met someone." I raised my eyebrows. "Oh?" "Her name is Rachel. She's a teacher, divorced, has a 10-year-old daughter. We're taking things very slowly, but Mom, she's honest. Completely, refreshingly honest. After Sarah, I think that's the most attractive quality a person can have. Honesty is underrated." I agreed. "When do I get to meet her?" "Soon." She's nervous about meeting the mother who saved her boyfriend from financial ruin and a disastrous marriage. I laughed. "I'm not that intimidating." "You are, actually, in the best possible way." As David left that afternoon, I reflected on how much had changed since that terrible Tuesday when I'd walked into Robert's office. I'd lost a husband, but I'd gained something more valuable: the knowledge that I was strong enough to face hard truths and make difficult decisions. I'd also gained a deeper relationship with my son, built on mutual respect rather than polite obligation. David saw me now not just as his mother, but as a woman who'd fought for what was right when it would have been easier to stay silent. The house was quiet around me, but it wasn't the oppressive silence of loneliness. It was the peaceful quiet of a woman who'd reclaimed her life from people who'd tried to write her out of her own story. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic confrontation or public humiliation. Sometimes it's simply refusing to participate in your own deception, choosing truth over comfort, and discovering that you're much stronger than anyone, including yourself, ever imagined. Sarah and Robert had thought they could manipulate everyone around them, that their wants mattered more than other people's lives. They'd learned the hard way that some people don't stay fooled forever. And some people, when pushed far enough, push back harder than you ever expected.